Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the longest campaign, it seems like the longest campaign in political history is about over. Our all-star panel will review Pennsylvania politics in depth and in detail, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, the host is going to try to get through that with a tough voice, too much yapping, I think, for interviews. And interviewing today, our all-star panel. Sitting over here on my right is Fred Anton. He's the CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, a frequent guest, along with a couple of other frequent guests, Gene Barr, VP, Vice President with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, and Jim Redmond, another Vice President with Hospital and Healthsystem Association of PA. All right, gentlemen, before we get on to the campaign, I want to raise a question with you. Jim, we'll go around here quickly. I'll start with you. Look, what happens in this governor's election is pretty important for the future of the state, but we didn't get a lot about the big legislative picture. What impact do you think these elections, legislature and governor, are going to have on what happens in the state of Pennsylvania?
I think the big question is what party controls the House. And right now it's 104 to 98. There's one vacancy.
Right. And
it's very possible that the Republicans could retain or regain the majority in the House, first time since 2006.
Right. So if they were to win, Gene Barr, the House and the governorship, and right now, not arguably, we'll get to that in a minute. I'll start with Fred on that. Tom Corbett looks like he has a pretty substantial lead to own both branches, in a sense. You know what I mean by that? That's a big deal, isn't it?
Well, and they have all three, because the Senate's not changing. You got the state
correct.
Senate that's not changing. Therefore, they'd have all three, which is the first time in some number of years. And again, it's one of those things where what kind of agenda are we going to set? Are we going to make real progress towards changing Pennsylvania for the better?
Yeah. Fred, do you agree with this? I mean, you remember the Ridge years?
I remember the Ridge years, and in my judgment, very little progress was made on a conservative agenda in the Ridge years. Taxes were not reduced in the way they should have been for businesses, and just because we, meaning the Republicans, I am a Republican, have control of the governorship and three branches of government, doesn't mean we will get responsible government. Yeah. There are two things in politics. Whether you win or lose is the first. Yeah. The second is after you've won, whether the people who you've won with implement your agenda. It took me a number of gubernatorial elections.
Figure that out?
Yeah, I figured that out after
you're a smart guy.
20 years. It took me 20 years.
All right, look. But it does seem like in the course of the campaign that Tom Corbett is running a campaign that looks a lot like Chris Christie over in New Jersey. Right, Jim? I mean, he's not being a sort of this centrist. He's running pretty conservative. Yes? No?
I agree with you. You know, the big issue facing Pennsylvania next year will be dealing with the state's budget. Projections are that we'll be at least around $4 billion short. And
that's the structural deficit you're talking about.
Attorney General has said he's not raising taxes.
Yeah. So look, I mean, guys, you've been around Harrisburg,
but I don't necessarily see the passion from Tom Corbett on reducing the size of government that I've seen from Christie.
Okay.
Now, Christie is very passionate. He's very emotionally involved.
I get it.
And while Tom Corbett is expressing that, I just have not seen the passion.
Well, it's interesting. You see both candidates for governor that are basically running against Harrisburg, which is an interesting tack. And, you know, perhaps Fred's right, but I think some of that is more to how Corbett is. But I think Tom Corbett is saying the things that, and he's tapped into that resentment against the growth in government. And now, as we've said, we've got to take that agenda and go forward. We've got to do the things that are necessary. Because Pennsylvania, to be honest, in terms of economic performance, lags the pack. That's got to change.
But not arguably. I mean, both Dan Honorato and Tom Corbett, the respective gubernatorial candidates of the Democratic and Republican parties, are running as, in a sense, fiscal conservatives. I mean, they're not, Jim. They've had no taxes. Dan Honorato hasn't signed on a dotted line. But you raised a good point that you've all been discussing this. We're going to have a $5 billion structural deficit in this state with no new taxes. I mean, is that even doable? I mean, and they're not being very specific about what they'll cut, right?
It's an incredible challenge, and I think we're in for a very long year.
Now, would it be, obviously, if the Republicans control the Senate and the House, and what would you give the odds? I'd say about 60-40, the Republicans will control the House. Let me just ask you, go around. You think that's reasonable or not?
I think that's reasonable. I think it's higher than that.
Higher than that, Fred?
I think 55, 60 is probably about right.
I agree.
From your assessment. All right, well, then that will give one party literally complete control of the reins of state government. And here's my question, then I want to move on. And Jim, I'll start with you. Do you think that means that it'll be all easy? I mean, do you think that the Republicans will be on board with, let's say, Tom Corbett should he win?
No. I think lawmakers are going to find it very difficult to do some of.
When one party controls three branches of government, the leaders of each one of those branches begin fighting among themselves. That's what happens.
All right,
and I think we've seen already from Dominic Pileggi a statement. He doesn't
majority leader of the Senate.
He doesn't know how they're going to govern without raising taxes.
We're going to break, but Gene, Pileggi has raised questions, the majority leader in the Senate, about whether it can be done without raising taxes. He's made that point, right?
He has said that, but let's go back to one of the other points, too. Let's take Tom Corbett out of the equation looking at the House Republicans. Keep in mind, they've got one member of their caucus who has consistently voted with the Democrats and was Speaker as a Republican in the Democrats. So you've got to have more than the 102 in order to make this effective.
All right, we're going to get into the governor's election. We'll let them weigh in on prospects for either candidate following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, this is our preview of the election. A couple of days, you all get out and vote. I started the segment with Jim. We'll go to you, Gene, on this one. The governor's election, all the polls now show a widening gap. Tom Corbett inching out. Maybe, as I've mentioned before, you got Governor Rendell, whose popularity has plummeted. He's talked about taxes. Is this a question where the voters just may not want to put a Democrat in to replace, let's be candid, an unpopular Democratic governor?
Well, first off, we've got the typical 8-year swing that you've wrote about a lot and said there really is something to it. The other thing is, no matter what poll you look at, and you see more than any of us, but no matter which one you look at, the approval ratings for both President Obama and Governor Rendell are horrible. And that's got to have an impact on a Dan Honorado. Plus, Tom Corbett is out there. I said he tapped into this resentment, and I think you're seeing that coming through now with him, as you note, pulling away in the polls.
Yeah. Jim, do you think that there's, it certainly looks like Tom Corbett will win, but we're not going to end that. He's certainly the favorite, and I think everybody would admit that. What do you think the Democrats, what do they do in the last couple of days? Is it all about turnout?
Oh, I think it is. And I think Dan Honorado is a very capable individual, but he's not well known in the Southeast. And there's not the excitement in the Southeast that is necessary for a Democrat to win statewide.
Yeah. Fred, you live in the Southeast, you live in Philadelphia. The Democrats can't win without a big turnout in the city of Philadelphia, and they can't win without winning the suburbs, can they?
No, they can't. And as a matter of fact, not so much with Tom Corbett, but with the senatorial race, I believe it's going to be decided in the Philadelphia suburbs, Bucks, Montgomery, Delaware, and Chester there are a lot more independent voters in Chester County than there have been before.
Right.
And I also think those 3 House races in Chester County that are held by the Democrats are going to be very pivotal on whether the Republicans gain control of the House. But I would say that if the Democrats do not win 2 of those 3 suburban counties, and Delaware and Montgomery particularly.
But Gene, I'll tell you, I don't remember seeing in a midterm election the Democratic sort of national bigwigs in this state. Obama back for the 3rd time. Bill Clinton, he's virtually living here.
Right.
Big swing from Erie down to Fred's hometown down to Philadelphia. I mean, I don't think I've seen a party work this hard.
Well, keep in mind the other things. You've got the governor's race, and you've got Tom Corbett, who's run twice statewide, which is a huge advantage. You've got the U.S. Senate seat we talked about, and you've got a number of congressional seats in play. And I think the Democrats are looking at this saying, you know what, we know we're going to lose a couple. If we start losing 3, 4, 5, this is going to be a groundswell. And Pennsylvania is a huge state nationwide for them.
Yep. Jim,
Harry,
go ahead.
I think you're going to get a low turnout in Philadelphia. Now, they're working hard. There's very little to offer to African-American voters for the Democrats in this election. And Sestak has really not engaged the Pauls and the political leaders in the city. I'm predicting a low turnout in the city of Philadelphia.
Well, how about in general, Jim, you live here in the mid-state area. Obviously, in the mid-state area, it looks like there's going to be more interest than elsewhere. But I think you hit on to something. For all the campaigning and all the negative ads, there just seems to be a kind of flat feeling. Maybe the air is sort of after the 08, the big campaign with Obama and everybody's excited. I just get the sense that there's not a lot of passion. Are these guys onto something here, you think? You've been around.
I agree. I don't know if it's because of my age that I've been through
You've
all
been
of
through
this.
too many campaigns.
But this is probably the least exciting gubernatorial election that I've witnessed in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the personality. Maybe we say this all the time. If we don't have Ed Rendells or Arlen Specter's, 2 different kinds of personalities, we say, well, it's just sort of boring. But is it that, or is it just that there's no big ideas on the table? It's all about cuts and budgets and taxes and maybe, go ahead.
I think there are some ideas. I think, this is, from our perspective, when you look at the U.S. Senate race, to me, this is one of the clearest ideological divides you've had in a long time.
Right.
But I think also, if you go around the mid-state, I think that there is that resentment, beneath the surface, that fervor that perhaps isn't evident, as Fred says, in the Southeast.
Well, you're right about that. Let's start with that, but we also want to segue into the Senate. The U.S. Senate race, it's one of the most pivotal races in the country. I don't know if the Republicans can win the 10 they would need to take over the U.S. Senate, but the Pennsylvania race is pretty important. Back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Healthsystem Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back with our panel. Days before the pivotal election in Pennsylvania. Remember, get out there and vote. Fred, Anton, Gene Barr, and Jim Redmond, frequent guests on the program. All right, Fred, Gene Barr made the point, when you talk about the U.S. Senate race, you got 2 guys that are on different planets. One pretty conservative and one pretty liberal, and never the middle shall meet. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right about that, but I think even more importantly, the geographical situation is going to make that race much different than the governor's race, because SESTAC is very, very popular in Delaware County. And I think Brian Lentz is benefiting from the Democratic resurgence in Delaware County.
Okay. Lentz, by the way, is a Democratic candidate to replace Joe Sestak in the 7th Congressional District, which is a district mostly in Delaware County for our viewers.
So even though there's a big ideological divide, I think Sestak has some popularity in the
region there?
In that region.
And you think that's why the race in the polls is closer?
Yes, I do. I think that's the difference between the governor's race and the Senate
Well,
race.
it also could be, Gene Barr, the fact that Sestak has really been relentless on tying Pat Toomey to Wall Street and derivatives. And I joke and say I have no clue what a derivative is, but I think it's bad, right? I think must be bad. I won't ask you to explain a derivative. I know you can. I know you can.
I'm not going to explain a derivative.
And then tying him to the China business guy and trade. That actually has been reasonably effective for Sestak in keeping the, do you agree with that?
Well, to a certain degree, but I think that, you know, when you look at it, a lot of the things that he's accused of dealing in weren't even around when he was on Wall Street. But on the other hand, I think Toomey's been very effective in tying Sestak to Pelosi and President Obama's unpopular policies. So you've seen each of them take a similar tack, trying to tie their opponent to something else.
Yeah. Jim, on this sort of ideological difference, typically we find candidates, I mean, you've watched a lot of these, they run to the middle. They kind of, there's no middle here. I mean, it's Pelosi, and it's one guy's Pelosi, you know, for Pelosi and Obama, and Toomey says, or Sestak says, Wall Street derivatives and never the middle shall meet.
Yeah, I think the other issue is that Sestak is not that well known outside of the southeastern region. Being a congressman from the southeast,
good point.
Having not run really statewide, Toomey appears to be better known, and appears that has helped him.
Yeah. The other thing is, I mean, all now there are reports coming about how negative the campaign is. I mean, usually they'll end on positives. This time they have a few positives, but this is an extraordinarily negative campaign, befitting, I think, the polarization.
Yeah, that's not unique to Pennsylvania.
No, that's true. Yeah, not. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the television commercials are more distorting than I've ever seen. They're less connected to really positions that people have.
That's a
now,
good point.
We've lost a lot of jobs to China. To blame that on Pat Toomey, which the ad obviously does, is extremely unfair.
On all the commercials, just let me add an editorial. The fact checkers now say that they're finding more distortions in the. Just to reiterate Fred Anton's point, more distortions, errors, and misstatements in commercials in this cycle than in past cycles. So I think you're absolutely right. All right, what's the future hold? Stay with us, and we'll tell you in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Before we get out of here, and look, I'm going to have you guys back after the election when we get closer to the new administration, and we'll weigh in and see what issues. But Jim Redmond, you brought up something earlier I want to return to. What are we talk generally, 3 or 4 of the big issues on the table when the governor on January 20 puts the hand on the Bible and says this is it?
Well, one is going to be the budget. Our next governor has until March to present his first budget. Second will be pension reform. Third will be the Marcellus.
That could be a $29 billion problem, if not more, right?
Right.
Marcellus
Shale is another issue that they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And then there are going to be a series of things that
transportation
would be another one.
Infrastructure.
You agree? I think there's going to be a real push, depending upon the outcome in the House, to do some legal reforms in the state.
Okay. I got to ask you.
Of course,
Go ahead, Fred. Go ahead.
There's going to be a big push to sell the liquor stores. Now,
You think that's real? You think that's real?
I think that's real.
Whoa.
Corbett has made that a big issue, and Mike Terzai, who, if the Republicans gain control of the House, they're going to push that. Now, whether they'll be successful. Education funding, other than the public schools, charter school education. Rendell has just killed a big education funding bill. They're going to put that right
so
up.
Before you go, I got to ask
tort
you a question.
reform.
Both candidates for governor have talked about legislative reform. Honorado more than Corbett. He says reduce the size of the legislature and term limits. Gene Barr, give me a break. They're really going to do that. I mean, I don't care what government. Honorado may have a good idea here, but is it going to happen?
I really don't know that that's going to be there. As Jim said and Fred said, one, there's things that have got to be dealt with. The other thing I'd add is unemployment compensation, which is going to be $3+ billion in the red by the end of the year. In addition to that, we're going to have to address things that will indirectly help those by making Pennsylvania more competitive.
Who wants to be governor? Remember, we've all talked about this. Can you covered have there been a time when you think a governor and a new legislature will face a more set of daunting issues in your memory?
No, this is unprecedented. I
mean, $5 billion structural deficit plus, when you get into the details of these problems, they're pretty severe. I mean, these are not right?
Yeah, these are some really big ones, and it's going to take a lot of work, and it isn't going to be done in 2 months. It's going to take a while. And there's going to be pain that's going to have to be shared across the board. But as Jim said, there's things that we got to do that are non-revenue that will actually help. Things like legal reform that we talked about that have got to be done. And, addressing labor situation. I mean, other states do pretty well by not having compulsory unionism. We've got to start looking at these things.
Do you agree that talking about all these reforms in the legislature are going to go nowhere?
Well, if we had a constitutional convention, there may be a chance in the Constitutional Convention to get some of these reforms, like reduced size of the legislature, and like more merger of boroughs and second-class townships. There are tremendous savings to be had there, but politically, it's impossible.
You don't think? I mean, Constitutional Convention. Both candidates, by the way, support that. Jim, likelihood. Little chance. The legislature has to do it.
Little chance.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, look, we'll have you guys back afterwards. Tough election coming up. We're going to urge everybody to get out there and vote. Pay attention to what goes on. We'll get you guys back after the election, and we'll see where the new administration goes. All right, as always, I want to thank you for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and you all stay well.